Present, we have Mayor Keith Hedrick, Councilor Lisa McCabe, Councilor Paul Norris, Councilor Christine Piazza, and Clerk Megan Peters.
Okay. So the referral was Freedom of Information Act training. So one of the things I like to do early in the new term is to bring Tom Hennigan from the Freedom of Information Office. He is the educational officer. And so I like to bring him in to go over the Freedom of Information Act and what keeps us out of trouble and what we might accidentally do that gets us in trouble. So with that, Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Mayor, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Hello, everybody. Pardon my back, but we love doing these sessions, especially when you're eager to have them, you know. Sometimes our commission will order them because towns or cities are just rolling in the wrong direction. So this is always fun. We don't do them to beat you up, to make you miserable. We do them to try to help, to try to give you some tools to work with so that if you have a freedom of information question or situation, you're better equipped to handle it. The idea is not to, you know, sort of burden you with too much, just sort of the basic ideas so that when, as I said, freedom of information becomes an issue, and it will inevitably when you're in public service, that you'll know how to handle it. I always preface the conversations by telling everybody that I'm not an attorney, so these are not orders, these are not commands, this is not a legal opinion from our commission. I've been doing this for, 20 years now, and I offer advice based on what I've seen, what I've heard our commission do, what I've observed over time, and again, it's advice, and it's meant to help you along. The Freedom of Information Act, you all probably didn't sign up for that when you ran for office, right? You said, what the heck is that? What? It didn't, but it comes with the territory. It's the law in the state of Connecticut, and it's actually 46 years old. It was Ella Grasso's brainchild when she ran for governor for the first time. And if you do the math, 46 years ago puts us right smack in the middle of Watergate. And you had a country that was in turmoil, a country that was beset by problems, many of which were caused by secrecy, things being done behind closed doors, clandestinely. And Ella was in Congress when Watergate kind of exploded all around us. And she was watching all this, and she was contemplating this run for governor, and she said, you know, if I run for governor and win, one of the things we're going to have to do is create some sort of an open government law so that this doesn't, what I'm watching here in Washington doesn't happen in Connecticut. And as you know, she ran, she won. And one of the first things she did in 1975 was push forward the concept of this law. And she did it with great flourish. And she said, in fact, this is going to be so important for our state, I will see to it that this law is approved unanimously by our legislature. Have you ever watched the legislature? Right? Can you imagine guaranteeing a unanimous vote on this law or on any law? Well, she guaranteed it, and I'm here to tell you that she got it. I've seen the video. I've actually seen a video. There wasn't a single no vote in the House, not a single no vote in the Senate. This law passed unanimously in our legislature. Now, other than being interesting and showing you why it's important, it also gives you a little insight back to why we're here tonight. Because to get to the point where everybody voted yes, can you imagine the negotiations? Can you imagine the arm twisting? Can you imagine the back and forth? And so you've got a law that's based on a really basic, simple concept. Open government, transparent public agencies. But when you read it, I know the mayor's read it. Has any of you tried to read it, tried to look at it? Your eyes, I guarantee you, will roll to the back of your head. I see Jill nodding her head back there, too. You know, it's like what the wherefores and the whereases and the what are we supposed to do there? Wait a minute, I thought this was about something. Well, to get to the point where everybody voted yes, you said, well, okay, we got a principle we're with, but there had to be a lot of compromise and a lot of back and forth. So you've got language that leaves a lot open to interpretation back to us, those of us who are on the front line. We have to look at it and say, okay, here's a situation, and sometimes you have to make a decision, you know, on the spot. Do we go into executive session? Are we properly noticed? Is this a record we hold? Is this a record we release? And you go back and forth, and you have to make a call, and that's why you need the tools to work with to make the call, and that's why we're here tonight. There is a lot of gray area, and those of us who are on the front lines have to make decisions. And you'll make a call, and sometimes you're absolutely certain that you've done the right thing, and there'll be somebody on the other side of the issue who's going to say, nope, I disagree. And another thing this law did was create the FOI Commission, which is where I work. And when someone disagrees with a decision that you have made based on freedom of information, they can file a complaint with the Freedom of Information Commission. The commission can say, Groton City, I'm sorry, you were wrong on that one. You've got to release the record. Or they can say you were right. One little piece on the side there is that if you have a complaint that's filed against you, someone says you've done something wrong, don't automatically assume that you're wrong. Because this law is subject to interpretation, because there are gray areas in it, you make a call based on the best information, the best tool, the strongest feelings that you have. They just disagree. But I argue that if you made it in a rational way, it goes to the FOI Commission, the commission makes a ruling, you're going to be upheld, that your decisions will be held. But that's why it's important to have some of the basics in your hand to know what you're supposed to do. The law is about two basic things. It's about access to public meetings, access to public records. We'll talk about both of them, but most of you are board and commission members, right? We'll talk mostly about the meetings provisions. We'll talk a little bit about records, but one of the things that it's not, it probably should have been called freedom of access, is what it really, because it's about those are the two underpinnings of the law: access to meetings, access to records. But it's called freedom of information, maybe because it sounds better, I don't know. But a lot of people think it's about free information. They'll march into the mayor's office or the police station, and or maybe to one of your meetings, they'll say, under freedom of information, I have a right to know. Tell me, why did you do this? How did you come up with this budget number? Why was there a police cruiser in my neighborhood last night? Well, that may be something that the individual has a right to know, but they've got to do a little bit of the work. We are not the answer people. A lot of people think that they march into a meeting like this and they start asking questions because of freedom of information. And it's not about answering questions. One of the first fundamentals is that this law doesn't actually require a public agency to answer questions. Now, we do. We're public servants, right? We're going to answer questions when people come and ask us. But at some point, you may not be comfortable answering that question. You may think, I'm not 100% sure of the answer, or we maybe need legal help on that one. And you're not violating anything in our law if you say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that, or I can't answer that. And that's a hurdle that some folks can't get over. They think that all they have to do is say freedom of information, and presto changeo, up comes the information. It's harder than that. They've got to come to a meeting and maybe listen to boards, talk about an issue, or get the records where the information is contained. But it's not onto us. And if you've ever had that happen, I suspect you have, and Jill, think for a minute about working at the Freedom of Information Commission. People think that we are the information center for the entire state of Connecticut. I routinely, almost daily, get requests from people for records. I got one today. Someone was looking for a bid package from DEP or DEEP. And I have to politely explain, we're not a repository for records. We don't have, and so a lot of times people don't get it. They think that we sit in this giant vault containing every record held by every agency in the state of Connecticut, and they call us up and push a button and out it comes. So a lot of times people say, Tom, you ought to think about maybe not doing the FOI sessions and maybe just, telling stories, because some of them, so I won't give you too many, but let me just give you a couple just to show you what people think we are and to show you what we're not. So this tale unwound almost 4 years ago. It's an email, and again, I get these every day. One of my functions at the commission is to go through the emails that we receive every day. I go through them all, sort them out, send them to the right people, process the complaints. So this guy writes in and he says, "Dear sir, please provide an electronic copy via email, preferably a spreadsheet, showing all the Medicaid paid electroconvulsive treatments, aka ECT, aka shock treatment, My request includes every field you have available, but certainly not patient identifiers. The request includes, but is not limited to, the name of the psychiatrist, license number, date of treatment, age of patient, city, county, name of treatment facility, address of facility, cost of treatment, etc. You'll like this one. Time frame, as far back as your computer records exist. Best regards, Ken Kramer, psychsearch.net. Does anybody know what that is? Psychsearch.net? I don't know what that is. So I have sort of a standard thing that I try to write to people. We're not a repository for records. You got to go to the agency that has them. Don't look at me. I have no idea who might have those records. Most people are appreciative. They don't quite understand the system. They say, thank you very much. Not this guy. His response is, well then, be a good public servant and get it into the correct hands instead of just blowing it off. Best regards, Ken Kramer, psychsearch.net. So I'm thinking, well, that's another Christmas card I'm not going to be getting this year, right? So fast forward to about 6 months ago, and I'm going through the emails, and oh my God, he's here again. This is a request for public records. Please provide an electronic copy via email of the name, company name, and address of the psychiatrist, your disciplinary board contracts to evaluate doctors. Sincerely, Ken Kramer. So now, do I respond? I mean, really, am I going to put myself through that again? So I said, well, we know the law, and we know that when you get a request for records, regardless of what it is, you have to respond in 4 business days. Because if you don't respond in 4 business days, the person making the request can file a complaint that you've denied their access. So I'm thinking, now, how am I going to frame this? Is he going to listen this time? So I put some of the standard stuff in there, and then I finish with this. In this particular instance, I would have no idea who has the records you seek. Could I be any clearer? Could it be any clearer? Response. If you're not the person who handles public records requests, would you please get it into their hands? I don't appreciate being referred, whatever that means. Folks, sometimes you can't win. So if you have people like that, you just have to sort of let it roll and explain to them that, no, that's not what you're supposed to do. A couple of months ago, I got a call from a guy. He says, I need your help. I said, what's the problem? He said, I need a copy of my naturalization papers. Naturalization papers? I said, isn't that like a federal thing? And he says, yeah, they were going to charge me $500, so I thought I'd come to you. You might have an extra copy lying around. You have to try to explain to people. I don't know if you get anything that drastic, but you get my point. You always have to make sure that people understand what the law is about. Access to meetings, access to records. So when we talk about meetings, which is kind of probably the primary reason you guys are here tonight, listen to the words of the definition. Meeting means any hearing or other proceeding of a public agency, any convening or assembly of a quorum of a multi-member public agency, and any communication by or to a quorum of a multi-member public agency, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, to discuss or act upon a matter over which the public agency has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power. Basically, when you gather to do your work, your assigned task, the task you're elected to complete, you need to think of it in terms of a meeting, which means you need to make sure that it's properly noticed, that it's open to the public, and that there are minutes of that meeting when the meeting is done. A lot of times people say, Tom, well, wait, we wanted to have sort of like an informal gathering before the meeting so we could go over some important stuff so that we didn't want to talk about it in public. It would make sense, but you can't do it. The law says no. The law says you do your work in public. We're going to form a little subcommittee. It's not the full board. It's not a quorum. Therefore, we don't need to worry about, and when I hear that, I always get nervous. We don't need to worry about freedom of information. Well, yeah, you do. When you look at the definition of a public agency, there's a phrase in there that says, including any committee of or created by. So even if you create a 2-person subcommittee, if it's an official subcommittee, it needs to follow the same rules. Make sure your meeting is noticed. Make sure it's open to the public. Make sure there are minutes when the meeting is done. The law talks to us about 3 different kinds of meetings. It talks to us about a regular meeting, a special meeting, and an emergency meeting. The regular meeting is a meeting that you have per a schedule that you've set up. I suspect you've set them up first and third Tuesday, second and fourth Wednesday, 7 o'clock town hall, 6 o'clock town hall. That is your regular meeting schedule. A special meeting is a meeting that you have when you're not scheduled to meet. Now, a lot of people see that word special, and they go, oh, no, we can't do this. You can do anything you need to do at a special meeting. Here's the key. First of all, are there any agenda preparers in the room? You're, okay? When you prepare an agenda, you want to make sure that it is specific as possible. The courts have been really strong on that, agenda specificity. The agenda needs to be available at least 24 hours in advance. It needs to be available in your office if your board has one, and then also sent to the town clerk and posted, and available. For a regular meeting, should something occur that's not on that agenda, you have some flexibility. Someone can say, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add such and such to the agenda. It's not on there. Someone seconds the motion. If 2/3 of you want to do it, you can add it to the agenda. The difference between the regular and the special meeting is that at a regular meeting, you can add things. At a special meeting, you cannot. So when you're preparing your agendas, which is why I brought up the point, we all cut and paste items like old business, new business, other business. They're not great items, but at least at a regular meeting, the chairman can say, is there any other business? And someone can say, yes, I'd like to add this. But at a special meeting, if it says other business with nothing underneath it, you might as well take the item off because you can't add anything to the agenda. And that's the fundamental difference between the two. Otherwise, they're virtually the same. You don't have a quorum, you can't meet, whatever that is, that's what the difference between the regular and the special meeting. The third kind of meeting that we talk about, the emergency meeting, is a meeting really, folks, that I discourage you from using. Emergency meeting is an unnoticed meeting. And the problem is that what constitutes an emergency in the eyes of the law sets the bar really high, probably higher than all of us in this room think it is. The example I like to use is we have some holidays that we celebrate on the state level. I think of Veterans Day. I think of Martin Luther King's birthday. The holidays that aren't necessarily in the mainstream of people's minds, and they think, okay, I have a meeting. The meeting is tonight, Tuesday night, and it's the Tuesday night after a Monday holiday, right? So the Monday holiday, you have to get that agenda in 24 hours in advance. I get a call like this on the Tuesday morning. I've got a problem. What's the problem? I always bring the agenda into town hall the Monday before the Tuesday meeting. I brought it down, town hall was closed. I brought it in this morning, is that okay? Well, if you do the math, it's not okay. It's not 24 hours. I say, you do have a problem. They said, well, we've got way too much to do. I'm going to call it an emergency and call it a day. Oops, I forgot is not an emergency. In our minds, especially those of us who are not legally trained, it seems like a perfectly natural thing to do. It's an emergency. We screwed up on the agenda, but the reality is that's not strong enough. And people say, well, what's the big deal? What could happen? And, I'll shorten the version of the story, but you've got a situation, the town over on the other side of the state, where the Board of Selectmen held an emergency meeting. And at that emergency meeting, they terminated somebody. There was somebody who was, giving them trouble, and they terminated him. So they meet in an emergency fashion without notice, and they terminate the guy. And he says, well, wait a minute. What was the emergency? Why couldn't you notice the meeting, at least do it 24 hours in advance? And he filed a complaint. Remember I mentioned the complaint. He filed a complaint with the FOI Commission. And it turned out that they really didn't have an emergency. They claimed that the guy was threatening the first selectman, that he was a danger to the first selectman, and that's why they called it an emergency. So they file a complaint. It goes to the FOI Commission. The commission rules in favor of the guy and declares null and void everything that happened at that meeting. Now, our commission tends not to be punitive. That's all right. God is speaking to us, right? Yep. I guess they said this was going to happen, huh? Yeah, right. Well, at least we're inside. So, where was I? The commission said, we declare null and void. They don't do that very often, But that is one of the commission's strongest powers. So basically now, the guy was fired at a meeting that didn't happen because the commission wiped it out. I told you that there's, law is open to interpretation. The mayor, the first selectman didn't like the interpretation that the Freedom of Information Commission made, and he appealed it. You can appeal an FOI commission decision all the way to the Supreme Court. So he appeals it all the way to the state Supreme Court, and in this instance, which doesn't always happen, the Supreme Court agreed with the FOI commission and said, we too declare null and void what happened at that meeting. Now, if you're at all familiar with the process, taking something to the Supreme Court isn't like a 2-week process. It's a 3 or 4 year process. So I want you to think about that for a minute, all you HR people. The person was off the payroll for 3 or 4 years, and then at a meeting that didn't happen. They had a bigger problem on their hand, all because they didn't wait 24 hours because they decided that this was an emergency and they had to act without public notice. Does this happen a lot? No. But if you're ever in a situation where you say, oh, do we really need to wait 24 hours? I advise you that the one time that you don't do it properly is the one time that somebody files a complaint and you find yourself with a situation like this that's difficult to get out of. People always ask, well, what constitutes an emergency? And there is no real strong definition, but I hearken back to a case, not a case, but actually a situation. I was doing one of these workshops in Stonington a couple years ago, and they had a situation, you guys maybe even know what it was. There was an old factory building that had been hit by lightning or that was starting to crumble near a body of water. And they looked at it on a morning and they said, you know what, we can't wait 24 hours to take action here. They brought everybody together. They had to deploy police to block off roads and bring in the hazmat crews and all that stuff so the people didn't get hurt. Keeping people safe and out of harm's way is kind of where I put the bar for an emergency. If you ever have a situation like that, I hope you never do, you meet and within 72 hours create minutes that reflect what the emergency was, who was there, and what you did about it. And that's a different set of rules than you have for the regular and special meeting, but that's what you would do if you have an emergency. But again, my advice is always to try to avoid using the emergency meeting. Remember, your meetings are open to the public. Anybody has the right to attend. The FOI Act does not give anybody the right to speak at a public meeting. A lot of people think that it does. Public speaking is in your hands. So if somebody comes and they're being rude, or I know that wouldn't happen here, right? You never have problems like that. We all. By the way, I should have mentioned I served on a board of education for 10 years. I was the chairman for the last 5. I was on our board of selectmen. I get it. I mean, sometimes there's a clash, but you have a right to control. So let's suppose it's a hot item. Let's suppose it's budget time, and you want to limit people to 2 minutes or 3 minutes, or somebody's bringing up a topic that you've beaten to death over the last 5 meetings. We're not going to talk about that tonight. Those are things that you have a right to do. The board has control over public speaking, and who speaks, how long they speak, when they speak is entirely up to the board. At this point, let me just deviate from what I've been telling people for a long time. The legislature in the budget implementer bill just passed added some provisions that included some of the components, I guess would be the best word, of the governor's executive orders that we were all under during the pandemic. Now, we're meeting in person tonight. By the way, thank God, thank you for letting me out of the house, I mean, really. I am so tired of looking at a screen and doing these things. But the legislature felt that, and with some justification, that allowing virtual meetings brought more people in. I don't know, was that the experience here? Did more people tune in when you were meeting via Zoom or via? That's what they felt. In some cases it was. So what they did was they added some provisions to the law, and this is so fresh that I hesitate to even try to explain some of it, that don't require, but allow you to meet virtually if you choose, or to meet in a hybrid fashion. So in other words, you're meeting here and you're also offering the virtual platform. I need to stress that it's not required. At one point, the language had it all required, but it made it so that it's not. It made it so that it's something you have a right to do. Some of the highlights are, I guess if you're going to meet electronically in any way, They want notice to go out to all board members and the community 48 hours beforehand. That would be in addition to the agenda being 24 hours in advance. I took a call this morning from someone, not actually one of your neighbors, or sort of neighbors, North Stonington. They were in a panic because they didn't realize that the 48-hour thing was in play. I think there'll be a lot of latitude given in the beginning as people realize this. Another thing that we cannot understand is that they wrote all this stuff into the law, and there was a tremendous amount of conversation about the language and this and that, and it ends at the end of April of next year. We have no idea what their plan is. We just don't. We think that when they start the session next year, they're going to modify some of it, see how it went. But we started, I don't want to disparage the legislature too much, but we started talking to them in January of this year because it was obvious that they were moving in this direction, offering them suggestions and stuff. And, I mean, up to the very last minute, they were tossing ideas around and back and forth and back and forth. Everybody thought it was a great idea, but nobody knew how to implement it. I brought, we put our interpretation of it on our website, and I printed out a couple of copies. You can take them, share them, and again, I need to stress that this is our interpretation of it. We think this is what it's telling us to do, but, you know, stay tuned. We're not sure. Yeah, Joe. Yeah. By the way, I should have said this before. If you have a question while I'm talking, just raise your hand and jump in.
So my question is, obviously, we're hybrid tonight.
Right.
It was a very last-minute request, and so we did allow that to happen because we would have allowed it pre-COVID on the phone. Is that
Is that just a council member?
is just a council member?
Okay. The law always allowed board members to participate electronically. Which is, you know, you may think, oh, wait a minute, but the law clearly said that a member could participate via phone. We didn't see it before COVID, we didn't see it much beyond the phone, but in theory, board members all could have been on Zoom, but they're still needed, so the audience would have been here and everybody else would have been on a TV screen, in theory. So that's different, board members participating that way. The hybrid Zoom part, WebEx part, would be if the public was brought in that way as well. Yep. And I suspect that there'll be more questions. There's a piece in here that says if you're having part of the meeting electronically and it cuts out, oh well, it's tough. And we thought that was kind of weird. You know, why would you do that? You know, you're pushing to have people participate that way. Anyway, if you're interested, take a copy of this or look on our website. We did the best we could to try to make sure. One of the components that we wanted them to put in there is, did you have any trouble when you were going electronically with like Zoom bombing or anything like that? Did you have that happen? When they first went to this electronic meetings, have you heard, you know what the term is? Have you heard that term? People, you know, put the link out there. Now, let's remember back to, you know, a year ago, March, we were all locked in. We weren't going anywhere. So people were looking for amusement. So they were clicking onto these meetings, and some of them were funny. Some of them were dangerous, calling people names. And they were typically people who were not part of the community. That someone from Oklahoma would call in and Zoom bomb a meeting. And so the boards and commissions were calling up and saying, well, what are we supposed to do? There's a provision in the FOI Act that says you can't ask anybody who they are to come to one of your meetings. It's an open meeting. Anybody can come in. But the security steps, the extra layer that they wanted to take were to, you know, have somebody sign in. You know, send us an email and we'll send you the link so that at least we know who we're talking to. And they asked us what to do, and we said, uh-oh, there's clearly a conflict there because the law wants you to be able to carry on a meeting. So that was a situation where we made a call. We said, look, we don't think that that's going to be a problem. Even though clearly the law says that you can't make anybody sign in to enter a meeting, we think in this case, under these circumstances, it's the best way to go forward so that the business can get conducted. I got Zoom bombed once, if you'll allow me to digress for a second. I was doing a workshop like this, you know, on the screen in my house for a bunch of citizens. They weren't officials like you guys, and very nice people, and I'm talking, blah, 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 I'm talking away, and all of a sudden, the screen goes black, and I hear this loud sort of dance music. And I'm looking around, and my daughter and wife are downstairs. My daughter, who was teaching her first graders from our dining room, where's that music? I thought it was her music. And then the screen goes black, and all of a sudden, the strippers parade across the screen, right in front of my eyes. Oh, my goodness gracious. And when I tell you they didn't leave much to the imagination, let me tell you. And I can see the people who are running the thing trying to turn it off and everything like that. So anyway, that was a humorous Zoom bomb, but you can imagine if someone was trying to create trouble. So and then at that point, I realized, gee, maybe we wanted to get them to put something in there that said that boards and commissions are allowed to take, steps when they believe there's a security risk, but I don't think they put it in the law. Anyway, if you have questions about the electronic portion of the meeting, we could talk about it later. I sense that you guys are into the in-person thing. That would be my choice. But the other does give you flexibility on a winter night, a stormy night. You can still have the meeting. You don't have to postpone it and go forward. The law gives boards and commissions two different avenues that they can take to operate without the public in the room. One is called executive session. Have you all heard that term? You know what I'm talking about? Remember that an executive session is a portion of a publicly noticed open meeting. It's not something that sits on an island by itself. It's not a separate issue. A lot of people will call and say, well, do we need to notice the meeting? It's only an executive session. But an executive session still needs to be convened in public. The board needs to make a motion to go into that executive session, and then it needs to vote to go into executive session by a 2/3 vote of those board members who are present. You vote, you go in, you have your discussion, and then you come out to take any action you're going to take. If you carry something with you tonight, never, ever, ever vote behind closed doors. The law is very strict about making sure that every vote, every decision is made in public, and that the vote is recorded in the minutes, and that everybody knows exactly who voted for what or for whom. There's 5 reasons for an executive session. A personnel matter, pending claims or pending litigation, a security matter, a land transaction. The town is going to build a new police station, and the police station building committee is negotiating with different landowners trying to find the best location for that station. You wouldn't have to conduct those negotiations in public. You could do them behind closed doors because talking about them in public might negatively impact your position. The town is trying to lease a town-owned building, and they're negotiating. So, oh, gee, the town's here. If we go here, we can, that sort of thing. You could do that behind closed doors to protect the town's position. The 5th reason for an executive session is a little broader than the other ones. It allows a board or commission to have a conversation about a document or documents that you believe are exempt from disclosure. A good example, any of you on boards that deal with bids or RFPs? Anybody? There's an exemption in the FOI Act that allows a public agency to withhold the content of a bid or an RFP until you've actually signed the contract. So let's suppose you're the Board of Education and you put your transportation contract out to bid. And you get a lot of bids from the different bus companies, DATCO, First Student, they all come in with their bids, and you want to look at them. Well, because those bids are exempt, because you're allowed to withhold them from the public, you could go into executive session, have the conversation about the content of the bids. Well, we like this price for gas, but this price for transportation out of town. Have those conversations, and then come out and vote. And you can do that because the documents themselves are exempt from disclosure. So you ask your attorney for a written legal opinion. You are the client. So you ask the attorney for the written legal opinion, it comes to you. It's now covered by the attorney-client privilege because you don't have to share that with anybody. That's the opinion that you've sought from your lawyer. So you could go into executive session to discuss the advice that your attorney has given you. Just a couple of examples. The executive session for personnel. First of all, agenda preparers, don't ever let an agenda go out that says executive session personnel. The courts have come down really hard on that, too. Executive session personnel, discussion of the performance of a public works employee, discussion of the performance of a police officer, of a teacher. You don't necessarily have to name the individual, but you've got to have more than personnel matter on there. I answer questions like that almost every day. Is that enough? No, it's not. And that's just the way the commission and then the courts have followed up. They want more specificity than that. You also have to remember that if you're dealing with a personnel matter and you're dealing with an individual, that person needs to be given notice before the executive session takes place. We're going to talk about you behind closed doors. The person then has the right to come forward and say, no, you're not. I don't want that to be behind closed doors. I want that discussion to be held in public so that everybody can hear it. And if the person goes down that road and demands that, you cannot go into executive session. That's the individual's right. Where people get confused is that they believe that, okay, I don't want it in public, but if you're going to talk about me, I should have a right to be in the room. I have a right to defend myself, a right to tell my side of the story, and that's not the case. You have a right to do that in public, but if you waive that and they go into executive session, the board then holds all the cards. The board can invite somebody, and typically, in a situation like that, the board will invite the person in, but it's never required to do that. So sort of file that away. The board's never required to invite anybody into an executive session. It can invite people in to give evidence, to give testimony, to hear somebody's side of the story, to use their expertise, but no one is ever required to go into executive session other than the members of the actual board. The executive session for pending claims and pending litigation is pretty much what it sounds like. There's a lawsuit, there's an FOI complaint, there's a CHRO complaint, and you want to talk about your strategy, how to handle it. It also is a little broader in that it lets a board contemplate taking legal action. You know, you've got somebody who's not paying his taxes, and you want to take action against them, but you wouldn't have to discuss it in public and tip that person off that you're going to send, you know, you're going to take legal action against them. You go into executive session, what do you think? We wrote a lot of taxes, what do you want to do? And you could have that conversation behind closed doors. People say, well, wait a minute, we're going to come out and vote on it. Aren't we going to tip them off then? And the answer would be, if you're specific, yes. So the law sort of gives you a little wiggle room there. Make a motion that we follow through on the legal action that we discussed in executive session to protect the city's rights. You know, something like that. Yes?
I just have a question about just the executive session. I've been on council for a few terms. In the past, we've talked about maybe a couple issues when it comes to like medical with personnel, right? Where it's kind of like a filing with HIPAA, you know?
Yep.
One was mental health. I think one was like extended benefits to
Mhm.
pass to see, you know? Do we like where's the line draw with HIPAA and say human resources and the mayor disclosing information to us?
HIPAA really only comes into play if you are the agency providing the care. So now, the reason you could have that conversation behind closed doors is that there is an exemption for records that have medical information in them. So you're going into executive session to talk about this person's performance. The way the executive session is worded, it says, discussion concerning the appointment, employment, performance, evaluation, health, or dismissal of, so the health piece for executive session allows you to go in and have that conversation.
Also, some of the times, the other thing that allows us to do that occasionally when it applies is pending litigation. Because some of those things have come up
Yeah,
when there's pending.
I understand. I mean, but would say an employee of like say the city, say say they just simply just didn't want anybody knowing about their health conditions, but the mayor or human resources, but then we had a conversation, could they go after us?
No.
For this? And they
No,
can't go after the city?
because the exemption there is a permissive exemption on the record part. But you said that could be also part of a lawsuit, but it's also, as the keepers of the town, you have a right, you've got a firefighter who's got a bad back, and you have to discuss the severity of the bad back as to whether or not that person can remain on duty.
Yeah.
That's your right. That's your, not only your right, that's your obligation as a council person.
Yeah, no,
to do
I
that.
assume that. I just don't, I think I asked prior, and this is just a further
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
explanation on it, just clearing it up.
Yeah, so no, you're well within your rights to do that. When we enter the public sector as employees, we tend to lose some of our expectation of privacy. And, you know, if health is an issue in somebody doing his or her job, the people in control would clearly have a right to talk about it and deal with it in that way, so. The last of the executive sessions would be for a security matter. And that one never used to come up very much, but in the last 9 years, it has after Sandy Hook happened. And it happens a lot with boards of education, talking about the extra resource officers, the extra measures they're going to take to keep the schools safe, to bulletproof glass and things like that. It's stuff that none of us in this room ever had to worry about when we went to school, but it's a reality now. And clearly, a conversation about something like that with a room full of people, on the off chance that the wrong person sitting in the audience, would give them the option to have that conversation behind closed doors. The executive session, you know, takeaway is, remember, it's part of a meeting. You need to vote to go in. You need to have your discussion, and then make sure the minutes reflect what the topic was, who went into the executive session, when you went in and when you went out. That's kind of the key to making sure executive session is and when you're in there, and gosh, I know the temptation is great, well, gee, now we're behind closed doors, let's talk about other stuff, don't do it. I guarantee you, the one time that you do it, somebody spills the beans, and, hey, they talked about this in executive session, was that proper? No. And then you go to the complaint situation that you just don't want to deal with. Any questions about executive session? Yes, ma'am.
Slightly off topic, but not,
Okay.
hopefully not too far off. If you're not a government entity, but you have a government grant, so your money coming in, and part of that is to, say, pay for personnel, is that subject to?
If you are performing a governmental function, the answer would be yes. If you're acting in the shoes of government, or if you've been given a task by the governmental entity, you must perform this in the name of the city or the town, yes.
Okay.
All right? Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Executive session. Okay, so I mentioned that there were sort of two paths that boards could take to exclude the public. The second one's a little funky. In the definition of the law, of the meeting, which I read to you, this next sentence says, meeting does not include. Meeting does not include. It then lists a series of things, many of which every one of us would say, gee, that sounds like a meeting. Why? Well, the legislature then said, well, you can call it a meeting if you want, but for the purposes of freedom of information, it's not a meeting, which means it's not noticed, it's not open, and there are no minutes. Collective bargaining. The law says that, yes, it looks like a meeting when you're having collective bargaining, negotiations, strategy sessions, but for the purposes of FOI, it's not a meeting. So it's not noticed, it's not open, there are no minutes. Executive level search committees. Superintendent of schools retires, the board forms an executive level search committee. It can operate outside of freedom of information. Now that one I kind of understand. If you're looking for, top level employee, you may get people who are already employed and don't want their current employers to know it. So clearly they could do that. They'd be more comfortable applying. You'd get more applicants if you didn't have to reveal, when they were going to apply and all those sort of things. I get a kick out of this one. Any chance or social gathering, I lost my place. Social meeting, neither planned nor intended for the purpose of discussing matters relating to official business. If members of your board go out to dinner, what in the hell else are they going to talk about, right? So let's not be naive. Let's be realistic. You guys love each other, right? You're going to go out to dinner. You're probably going to talk about council business or city business, right? Here's what you need to remember. You want to avoid the deep deliberative conversations that you should be having here at the table. The reality is, we can't be naive. Those conversations are going to take place. They're going to happen. But don't get into that. I guarantee you again, that one time you get into that hot debate, the wrong person's sitting in the next booth and says the council had the debate at the pizza restaurant after the meeting, or at the bar probably after the meeting, and I'm filing a complaint. Make sure you do the bulk of your business in public. Yes, these conversations, I get calls from people, especially people who are new to boards. Can I not talk to them? Can I? No, yes, you can have the conversations, but just remember, you want to make sure that you do your business in public. And kind of to that end, when I read you the definition, and Jill asked the question about the counselor participating electronically, the definition of a meeting, whether in person or by means of electronic equipment, that also applies to things like emails and text messages and things like that. I never tell boards, commissions to just stop using them altogether, because let's face it, that's the way we communicate today, especially the way we have in the last 16, 18 months. But understand that you can't have a meeting via email either. Hey, what do you think about this? What do we ought to do about that? And then all of a sudden the emails are flowing back and forth, and you're having a meeting via email. People says, who's going to know? The person who says, I want to see any and all emails between council members about topic X. They become public records. When you create an email in the conduct of Groton City business, it becomes a public record, and in theory, somebody could see it, and somebody could read it and say, oh my goodness, they're having an improper meeting. They could feed it to the New London Day, and then you've got a mess on your hands. Don't stop using these devices to communicate. When's the meeting going to be? Here's what I think about that issue, folks. Let's bring it to the next meeting and talk about it. That's fine, too. But the debate, the conversation, you don't want to let the snowball roll down the hill. This is a great idea that I have. Then you write back and say, I think that's stupid. Then you write back and say, I think that's a great idea. And you're having the debate that you should be having here. Avoid that. Understand that when you create those emails, you're creating a public record, and you could be setting yourself up for a problem. I'm not saying not to use them, but just understand that whether in person or by means of electronic equipment applies to that as well. The last thing that we talk about when we talk about meetings is minutes. Are some of you agenda people, minutes people too? Yep. I feel your pain. I do the FOI Commission meeting minutes. Minutes need not be the recreation of War and Peace. They are not every word that everybody says. They are not meant to be verbatim transcripts. You will get people who will come before you and say, I want every word, and they'll launch into this, Gettysburg Address. I want every word of this in the minutes, blah, blah, blah. Well, you can put it in there if you want, but you are not required to do that. The only requirement for minutes, the only legal requirement for minutes, is a record of who votes for what or for whom. That's all that's legally required. Now, you want more than that in there. You're creating the city historical record. I get that. But how much more is in your control, whether yours or the board's or the mayor's? Somebody makes a decision, this is what we want. It makes your job at least somewhat bearable. You create the minutes, and within 7 days you produce them so that people can see what happened if they missed the meeting. But remember, I always recommend that crisp, clear, concise recapitulation of what happened. Then you can see it, you've got the historical record, and you're just in a much better place. Yeah.
So my question about the minutes is, I know you have 7 days to make them available to people, but you have 48 hours to make the votes available.
Right.
Do the votes, so if you don't have the minutes completed within the 48 hours, how do you need to make those votes available? Or do you just have to know them so you can give them?
The latter.
Okay.
Now, they should be written down somewhere so that if you're not there, someone knows, but the idea is that if I miss the meeting within 48 hours, I should be able to know who voted for what or for whom. But that's not necessarily a formal document that gets filed anywhere if you don't want it to be. Some people, you're welcome, some people try to get their minutes done with 48 and then they're done. But those are people with a lot of time on their hands, I think, right? Before I talk a little bit about records, any questions about meetings that I didn't touch on? Anything you wanted to ask about? Yes, yeah.
I just wanted to clarify that I understood when you were talking about text.
Yep.
So in that, let's say if I said, hey, I wanted to just have an informal meeting, about, we're gonna talk about the rule on these nameplates. You know, just wanted to talk about it, everybody's general idea. So if people are discussing whether or not they can make it or not, or if they want to come or not,
No problem.
that's okay.
That's fine.
As long as they don't discuss the item of the nameplate.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Setting up a meeting, what's going to be on the agenda, all of those are fine. Yeah. Yep. Anything else on meetings?
Did you cover caucus?
Caucus, I didn't. I'll be happy to. Nope, I'll be happy to. Sometimes, see, I thought you guys were not politically motivated here. You didn't have that, no, right? I'm teasing. That's what, when I talked about things that are listed that are not a meeting, that you scratch your head, the mayor brings up the caucus. The law says that members of the same board and the same party are allowed to caucus without noticing a meeting. So, I mean, I don't know, let's suppose you three are one party and you three are the other party. You can go off and talk about anything you want till the cows come home, and it's not a meeting. Same board, same party. Let's suppose the mayor is in your group. I don't see anybody saying no, so, you know, they must like you enough to want to talk to you at least, right? So this would be a quorum of your board, and you're saying, wait a minute, it's a quorum. And that's like a major loophole in this law. But remember, in 1975, those were politicians putting this law together. So the caucus allows members of the same. So in theory, the quorum of the board could go, okay, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and then walk into the meeting and they could rubber stamp things. We don't like that, but the law does have that loophole. And if you think, you know, it's a problem in a town like yours where people, being serious, would probably get along well enough, think of a city like Norwalk that at one point had, you know, all members of the council were of the same party, so they could, in theory, go behind closed doors, set everything up, and have a 5-minute meeting and rubber stamp everything. So, but same board, same party. Where people get into trouble with the caucus is that they invite somebody else in. So you're having a caucus and you want the director of finance to come in and have a conversation about a budget item. Once that person walks in the door, it's not a caucus anymore, it's a meeting. That's where you want to be careful. You want to be really careful with the caucus.
And you shouldn't be using caucuses to conduct meetings,
No, no.
right? There have been councils in the past, not necessarily from here, but in adjacent places that they were in the middle of a meeting, they call a caucus, and they go and they do their thing, they come back and they'll vote.
Yeah, I mean, technically, that's not illegal, but I would argue it's bad policy and bad form. That would be my argument against that.
However, can a caucus be used to discuss strategy?
Yes, absolutely, sure. You'll see land use boards that are split. They'll split off and they'll have those kinds of conversations. Yeah, just again, remember, same board, same party only, and then you'll be okay. You won't be breaking the law.
With a land use commission,
Yep.
if they're not elected, does party affiliation still matter and they can still caucus?
Sure. Yeah, same board, same party. If you're on a land use board, what you mean, like appointed to a land use board?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
same.
planning and zoning, you get appointed to a planning and zoning commission and
Yep, same board, same party. Because that's who they are. Whether they're elected or appointed, they're members of that board.
I've been staffed to those commissions for years. I've never had that happen.
Yeah, well, most boards don't lean on it that heavily. It's only when there's something really controversial, they tend to split off that way. Yes?
Just wanted to reflect off what Counselor Carter had said in reference to when we were talking about people's health. You had put in there. So, I mean, this came up at another job I was at, and somebody had asked me, because I have a history of medical, and I'm like, well, I gotta look that up. So, you know, we're going into a lot of people asking different questions. And when I looked at the Department of Public Health and asked questions and researched it, the answer that I received, to break it all down, that it boiled down to, was if you're underneath the HIPAA umbrella, then you cannot discuss those issues or items with other people.
Yes, but you wouldn't necessarily be under HIPAA. You're not providing the care. You're not, you know, when you read the provision in the act. It's about, the HIPAA is for the hospitals, for the people who are providing care. But you're dealing with a medical issue that involves someone's employment. You could clearly have that discussion behind closed doors.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Sure.
I just wanted to add on to that because, a while back, I knew someone that worked at the hospital and had another job and was talking about a patient at her other job. So even though that job wasn't a healthcare job, because she was under HIPAA at her other job, like that was violating HIPAA, that she talked about it outside of work or whatever. So I think that's what, like, kind of the difference is it would be like if I was a nurse and that, so like if I was a nurse and I worked at a hospital where one of our employees went, I maybe would have to recuse myself or not.
That's possible, yeah. I'm not as well versed with HIPAA, but that's a very,
Because then I would fall, if
Right.
you actually worked in the healthcare field with that particular person, then you would fall under HIPAA, even though this is like your second,
right.
like, off.
There is some, yeah, there is some logic to that train of thought, too. I get questions a lot of times on HIPAA from police departments and fire departments. You know, they've got their reports, police on scene, so-and-so was convulsing or something like that. Do we have to redact that? The answer is no, because they never provided the care. You know, they called the ambulance, and so that's part of the report, but then the medical report is separate. You know, they wrote down what they observed, but they didn't actually help the person because the EMTs took care of that. So there's a fine line there. Anything else on meetings? Anything else you wanted to ask? So let me just talk for a couple minutes about public records. The simple thing to remember about public records, I alluded to it before, is when you create something in the conduct of city business, when you take it in, when somebody sends you a letter, when you read something, when you use something, it falls under the definition, the umbrella. Let me read you, listen to how broad this definition is. Public records or files means any recorded data or information relating to the conduct of the public's business, prepared, owned, used, received, or retained by a public agency, or to which a public agency is entitled to receive a copy by law or contract, whether such data or information be handwritten, typed, tape recorded, videotaped, printed, photostated, photographed, or recorded by any other method. That's pretty broad. That covers just about everything. And then you add this on to it, except as otherwise provided by any federal law or state statute, all records maintained or kept on file by any public agency, whether or not such records are required by any law or by any rule or regulation, shall be public records. And every person shall have the right to inspect such records promptly during regular office or business hours, copy such records in accordance with, it gives you the section number, or receive a copy of such records in accordance with the same section. What makes compliance with the records provisions hard, and Jill and the mayor and others who work in the public sector, I suspect you have to deal with this too, is that on top of those base definitions, there are different exemptions and exclusions. I mentioned the exemption for bids. We talked a little bit about health records. There's an exemption for records that are medical records that might be an invasion of somebody's privacy if they were released to the public. But you have to go to the base idea that everything's a public record and then apply the exemptions. A lot of times we react impulsively. Oh no, that's a horrible record. We can't, that's embarrassing. We can't release that. That's, that record is offensive. We can't release that. Well, if it's offensive, but it's a reason that somebody got punished or fired or something like that, the public might have a right to know. So if you ever, in your capacities, get a Freedom of Information request, remember, first of all, that you need to respond within 4 business days. Now, I don't know how you're structured here, whether somebody does that for you, but always find out who that is. Somebody writes to you and says, I want, all your emails about a particular project that you're involved in. Find out what you're supposed to do to get those out. And by the way, we get them too. Today I printed out, must have been about 30 emails from a woman who is giving us great difficulty at this point. She thinks that there's some sort of conspiracy going on with the case that she's got. So she asked for all the emails of all the employees in the agency. And as tedious as it was, we turn them over. We responded to her within 4 days, and then we produced them. But see, we do that sort of for a living, so we knew what to do. Just remember that you find out, maybe contact the mayor's office or ask Jill, or you get that job too. I mean, you know,
Well, let me-
yeah.
let me address
I don't,
that issue
yeah,
quick. So, all FOIA information is coordinated at the mayor's office. The police, they do specific FOIAs for them. All other information is here, because when I first got here, FOIA was everywhere, and we had no control of where it was, when it was. The information was provided differently, there was no consistency, and, people did not understand records requirements or anything like that. We have a standard form that we use to acknowledge that we are in receipt of your FOIA request. So the requirement is to acknowledge the FOIA request, not necessarily to provide all the information to them within 4 days, because you may not be able to do that. There have been FOIA requests when people go in and say any and all, and it may take months for us to get that, to find that information. Particularly if it spans back several years, we have to go down to the basement and dig up the records. Because we don't have all our records transferred to the cloud yet, but we're working on that. But that's basically how we do it here in the city.
right. So again, key point, 4 days to respond doesn't mean produce the records. It means to acknowledge. Now, you know, you may get one as a counselor, they may come directly to you. Just make sure that that acknowledgement goes out in 4 days, because if you don't, they can say you denied it, especially, and good point for me to jump in. Some people have taken to using this law as a weapon, as a means of getting back at people. So say you vote on something and they don't agree with you, and then they start asking for every email you've ever written or every document you have. You know, we don't encourage that. We discourage it. We try to stop it. But the reality is, it's probably under the umbrella of the law, a legitimate records request. You're going to need to respond, get that answer out in 4 days. But then remember, again, with the city's help, that it doesn't mean that everything stops. You know, freedom of information isn't intended to bring government to a halt. You provide access, the mayor used the word, in prompt fashion. Not immediately necessarily, just in prompt fashion, in a reasonable amount of time, without bringing everything to a screeching, grinding halt. Yeah.
So, what if I'm sick for a week or on vacation for 2 weeks and I don't read my emails from the city?
That's a great example of when people complain about promptness. That's one of the factors that goes into it. If you haven't seen the request, it's awfully hard to fill it, right? I thought what you were going to say is, what if I get this request and then I go on vacation? Or I'm responsible for filling a request and I'm on vacation. That all gets factored into it as well. Who's on vacation? Who's out ill? Where the records are stored? They're in the basement. We got to find them. All those things come. So if someone says they weren't fast enough, all of those things are factors when the commission makes a ruling on that. And the commission, I have at least believed to be very fair. I mean, I saw one case where the state police said, "Listen, this took us a year, and a year. How could that possibly be prompt?" But the way they laid it out, it was indeed prompt under the definition of the law. So that's a factor as well. Yeah.
If the council or the commissioners, so I'm going to repeat this if the council or commissioners get a FOIA request, would it be appropriate for them to have the mayor's office take care of that?
If that's the way you're structured, absolutely.
Okay.
There are,
So
there,
let me go on the record now that what I said before, all FOIA requests are controlled out of the mayor's office. Not controlled, not meaning controlling information. We have a record, we have a logbook, those kind of things. So if any board or commission or council gets a request for freedom of information, get it to us, me or Jill, and then we will take it from there, we'll acknowledge receipt, and then there'll be a record of that, and then it's in our court, we will then take on the mantra of 4 days to respond back. Something else, were you done with her?
no, keep going, yeah.
Well, something else that we got caught up in is that we do not have to create a record.
Well, absolutely.
So if somebody says, I want all information on this, because what happens is sometimes they want any and all information. I said, we got several years ago, after the Kentucky Derby thing, any and all information about any entertainment from any staff and all this. And so that took a while trying to figure out. And some of it we had, but some of it they wanted us to generate. They wanted specific information in a form. You do not have to generate that form.
He's seen this presentation before. He could give it at this point. But he's absolutely right. And you're also not required to do research. And hand in hand with the not being required to create a record. And just by the way, what happens is someone says, even a record that they're supposed to have it, and they insist that they have to, and they follow through and they insist on having a hearing. If you go to a hearing and say, look, they say they give me everything, I believe them, but they're supposed to have A, B, and C by law. If they don't have it, it's a different problem maybe, but the FOI Commission cannot require a public agency to create a record it doesn't have or has gotten rid of. And research goes hand in hand with that. A lot of times people will call a public agency or write to a public agency and say, I need you to, how about that? And you have no idea what they basically ask you to analyze something or figure something out for them, not required. It's about records that already exist, and that's what you would have to produce. I told you there were a lot of different exemptions and things like that. Let me just show you one, just to show you how it works, and this kind of came up before when we were talking about health records. There's an exemption in the Freedom of Information Act that allows a public agency to withhold the contents of a personnel file. Now, I said before that those of us who enter public life from the private sector were surprised sometimes by how much comes out, but the exemption does allow some of it to be withheld. And the exemption says that you're allowed to withhold something in a personnel file if it constitutes an invasion of the person's privacy. The standard for invasion of privacy was set back in 1993, state Supreme Court case. It's called the Perkins decision. And Perkins was a teacher who objected to the release of her attendance records. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, those of us who are in the public sector should expect our attendance records to be public. The public has a right to know what they're paying for when we're at work. The court then said, to have been an invasion of this person's privacy, the release of those records would have to have been both highly offensive and not a matter of public concern. And that set the standard which we go by today. Highly offensive and not a matter of public concern. Critical, not an either or, but both. So when a request comes in for a personnel file, and it's personnel, medical, or similar files, someone looks at it and says, would releasing this be an invasion of privacy? The HR person says, I think it meets both of those standards. Then and only then do they go to the employee and say, we've got a request for your personnel file. Do you want us to give it out or not? The employee says, I don't care, then out it goes. If the employee says, no, wait a minute, I agree with you, that might be an invasion of my privacy, then the record can't go out until or unless the requester makes a complaint against the FOI Commission. The FOI Commission looks at it and says, sorry, city, you're wrong, give out the record. How do you, think of the terms there. Highly offensive, not a matter of public concern. That's so subjective, right? And that's one of those huge areas of interpretation that falls on public agencies to determine whether or not a record should be released. And some of it, people really don't like their personal stuff out there, but as a public employee, you might have to. I'll give you one example. City of Middletown. A few years ago, there was a situation where a police officer was rumored to be having all kinds of trouble at home. The rumors got very loud, so loud that they took him off the street and they put him on desk duty. They did an internal affairs investigation. It was serious. The internal affairs investigation was thorough. It had lots of information that he was having problems at home, a lot of difficulty. Police department looks at it, though, and says, wait a minute, he's having trouble at home, but we also find that it's not impacting his ability to do his job. In fact, he's doing a really good job. They put him back on the street. The Hartford Courant immediately asked for a copy of this internal affairs report. A lot of times people, even police departments say, internal affairs, that's public. Yeah, that's, again, that umbrella is big, public records. So Courant asked for it. Middletown PD thinks about it and says, highly offensive, all this stuff about his personal life at home. And does the public really need to know it if he's doing a good job as a cop? No, it meets both prongs. We're not going to give it out. And so the current files a complaint, it goes to the FOI commission, and the commission agrees. It says highly offensive to tell what's going on at home, and they don't, all they need to know is he's doing a good job, and he's doing a good job. So it was never released. But the key is meeting both prongs of the test. Many times, the highly offensive standard is met, especially in situations where someone's being disciplined or terminated or demoted because they've done something wrong that's kind of offensive to tell the rest of the world, but it's something the public has a right to know because a police officer who was highly decorated is now, busted down to, patrolman because he's done something horrible. But it's a case-by-case decision, and it can be really hard. I know you have more work to do. Let me just give you one example of something else, just to stress this point. Well, maybe two examples. But think in terms of it being a public record. It's so important that you remember that when you create something, it becomes a public record. Think before you write, and clearly think before you send. Again, the way we communicate today, just think. This situation comes to us from one of our major cities. And again, we've been operating, behind closed doors virtually and all that. So it's been a challenge for everybody. In this situation, this city law department was looking for a senior legal secretary, but conducting all the interviews via Zoom or one of those platforms. And so they didn't ever actually sit in the room and do the interviews, all electronic. So at one point, the director of the law department says to somebody else, writes to a colleague via email, "I would like you soon to reach out to," they leave the name out, "on behalf of the law department, to thank her for her interest in the position and to inform her that we went in another direction. I feel that you have the most experience in our office handling these types of discussions after many years of breaking off relationships with your past girlfriends and flings." Would you write that? All right? So he sends that. So it's a public record that nobody's going to see except the person in the law department who got this accidentally put it on the screen during a deposition in court because that was also being done virtually. So the whole world got to see that email. Think before you write. Now, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think there was anything malicious here. I think this was one guy, this was truly locker room talk, one guy giving the other guy the needles. I don't think they meant, there was anything, but it's highly embarrassing, right? Think before you write, think before you send, because it could become now, it may fall under one of those many exemptions. I only showed you one. There's multiple exemptions, but it could. You just want to make sure that, okay, if I don't want to see this on the front page and then on the day, maybe I'm not going to send it, okay? Think, be smart about it. One other similar example, I got a call a couple, months ago now from a woman. She says, "Hi, my name is Sean." I said, "Hi, Sean, how are you?" She said, "Good." She says, "I'm calling you from Georgia." Georgia? Who's calling Connecticut FOI from Georgia? She says, "Yeah, my husband's an out-of-state contractor, and he did a job in Connecticut last summer. And I think he had an affair with a state worker." Why is she calling me? It wasn't me, right? Can I see that state worker's emails and text messages? Well, if there's an email that says on the state server, "Meet me at the construction trailer at 6 o'clock. We'll review the blueprints for the project." And then, That's a public record. She said, "Good, it'll help me with my divorce." Think before you send. Remember, you're creating public records. If it has anything at all to do with the conduct of the public's business, just be smart about it. Is there anything that I haven't touched on? I realize the records was compressed there. Is anything you want me to talk about, records, meetings, anything Any thoughts?
Council,
Any issues?
commissioners, anything that you're curious about or that we may have missed?
Now, what's going to happen is that we'll close out, and I'm going to walk out of here, and about 20 minutes after that, you say, I should have asked. I spend my whole day answering questions. People call. I have witnesses that I call back. It's been a little funky with us working sometimes in the office, sometimes not. The message goes to the phone at the desk. I retrieve it, within the hour, then I call people back. But you will get a call back. Don't ever hesitate to pick up the phone and call or send an email. I'll get you an answer. If I don't know an answer, I'm not afraid to say I don't know. I'll ask one of the attorneys. And it's never an order. It's never a command. It's what we think, based on the circumstances that you've presented, you should do. And then you can obviously make up your own mind after that. Okay? I brought with me, as I said, some of these, I printed out some of these on the electronic meetings. Feel free. And then I brought some of these. I call these the Freedom of Information American Express card. Don't leave home without them. They're highlights of the FOI Act. They're really good for a wallet, a purse, a desk drawer, something on the fly. So I'll leave some of these here as well, and feel free to take them. And our phone number's on the back, email address. Again, I can't stress enough, don't ever hesitate to give us a ring.
So when you were telling I think it was an example of, you're sitting out in public, and then the person in the other booth hears what you have to say, so they're gonna make a complaint. But we're going verbatim, so that's a he said, she said. But as you further talked, you were talking about be careful what you write, be careful what you write. So how does verbatim end up?
Well, that, he said, she
Boiling
said,
down.
it would depend on credibility. If somebody files a complaint under those circumstances, hey, they were having a meeting, and then the three counselors say, no, under oath, you're under oath. Three counselors say, no, we were just shooting the breeze, there was no meeting, nothing was decided there. I would argue in those circumstances, the complaint would be dismissed.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I can give you one that happened to us. This city council was invited to a town council meeting. We were supposed to be talking about, funding for the highway. And when we got there, they had their lawyer there, and our lawyer wasn't there. We wasn't invited. And, the decision was made to walk out of the meeting, and we walked out of the meeting, and we walked into a room to determine when we could meet again with them. And a FOIA complaint was filed against us for having a legal meeting. And we had to go testify that all it was, we were trying to figure out the date and time for the next meeting that we could meet to discuss with the council. And that was ruled in our favor, so sometimes that's a real.
Sometimes people, again, use this law as a means that they shouldn't, and that would have been one of those cases, yeah.
In a case like that, could you have called a caucus?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Can you repeat the question just for the record?
The question was whether that would have been a caucus. Only if everybody was of the same board, and the same party.
Yeah, and I don't remember if we were all, I think we might have all been in the same party, but we didn't even think about, we went in to do this, right? And so we weren't discussing what happened. They thought that we were discussing what happened. We didn't. We discussed when could we meet again to come back with these guys, because we had to meet again before they voted on the budget. And come to find out, we couldn't do it, and we ended up talking about that the morning of the budget, and that's the year that we got cut $830,000. And it's just, but that really happened, so. But see, they filed a complaint. Even if we had called it a caucus, they would have said, no, it wasn't a caucus. And they filed a complaint, so we had to go. It was an official complaint that was filed by two of the town councilors. And so we went to Hartford and testified.
And we're vindicated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else, guys?
Okay,
Thank you very much.
then I will take a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstention, motion carries. We are adjourned. Thank you all for coming out. Tom, thank you very much for coming.
Anytime.